In this video, we will be discussing multiple attachment, and specifically we'll be looking at how to write and organize an essay asking you to discuss the role of the father. The main question in multiple attachments, although multiple attachments can include attachment to grandparents, older siblings, uncles, aunts, nannies, and a series of kind of adults in the child's life, the big debate is, does the father matter? Is the role of the father equally important or more important in certain cases than that of the mother? And this is based on the premise that the mother has kind of historically, traditionally, and statistically been seen as the most likely primary caregiver, and in Bowlby's view, the person on which that internal working model is molded on, based on that kind of monotropic idea of attachment. So there are arguments that you could simplify as simple as fathers are not important and fathers are important. We'll be looking at the research in more detail and structuring it more clearly in later slides. But you could summarize the research into arguments that state that the fathers are important. For example, Schaffer and Emerson challenge that idea of monotropy, finding both that the father can be a joint primary attachment figure and can definitely be a secondary attachment figure. Field shows that the responsiveness of a parent doesn't depend on the parent's sex or gender, but that both parents can be equally nurturing, so the father can be the primary caregiver. And Grossman takes a different view, saying that the fathers are important, but maybe not in that kind of traditional nurturing role, but more in the play that they have with their child, the interaction that seems to be really important in a child's kind of social development. Arguments saying that the fathers are not important are research showing that it's the mother that seems to determine positivity in terms of attachment style in adolescence. So that's supporting Bowlby's continuity hypothesis and all the research in types of attachment and how the types of attachment seem to kind of persist over time. And that does seem to be determined more by the mother than the relationship with the father. There's also evidence showing that single-sex parent families, so families without a father, for example, lesbian families, don't seem to miss out on anything that a father figure, male figure might give. Obviously, we could argue that if same-sex parent families don't have any different development, that might mean also that families with two fathers are equally as successful, meaning that the mothers aren't important either. And then you could say that there's a biological argument where fathers, being male, just don't have the kind of hard wiring that women have in the ability to nurture their children. So moving on to how to structure the essay, and I will give you some time from slide to slide to write up your paragraphs if so you want. So just pause the video if you want to try writing up the paragraph as we go through. There's 3 sections that are AO1 and then AO3 for that viewpoint, and we do that 3 times. And the idea is to argue one potential hypothesis of what the role of the father might be, what the possible roles, and then your AO3 that will follow from there is evidence for or against that kind of role that you're describing, and potentially more AO3 could be the implications of this conclusion. So obviously, if you conclude that fathers are not important in the upbringing of children, that has implications for parental leave, meaning that women might be entitled to more parental leave than men, or men might not be entitled to any at all. So that kind of is the kind of consequence, and you could link it to implications for the economy as well. The arguments that we're looking at are the father could be a primary caregiver. The second argument will be that the father is most likely to be a secondary caregiver. And the third one is that the father plays an equally important role, but in a different aspect of development. So it's something different. So the 3 arguments are the father is as important as a primary caregiver. The second argument is the father is usually second place. not the most important caregiver. And the third is the father is neither primary nor secondary. He's something different and caters for different needs in a child. So here's the argument for the father as primary attachment caregiver. Just saying that is not enough. So you will bring in some figures into your AO1 just to give it a bit more depth. By just saying the father is a primary attachment figure, it's just a kind of micro statement. It might not generate any marks. So this is how you get your 2 marks for your first argument. You bring in the evidence that 3% of cases in Schaffer and Emerson showed the father as the primary attachment figure. So yes, it's much, much less likely, it's statistically rare for the father to be the primary caregiver, the sole primary caregiver, but it's not impossible. So it's a possibility. And in about a third, just under a third of cases, they didn't find a difference between the attachment of the child to the father and the mother, meaning that there was a joint primary attachment. This again challenging the idea of monotropy proposed by Bowlby. Now, your evaluation for this point would be looking at evidence that look at when the fathers are the primary attachment figure, they do form strong attachment with their children. And then you bring in Field, as mentioned before. He filmed 4-month-old babies in face-to-face interaction and found that the primary caregiver fathers were no different from mothers, spent more time smiling, imitating, holding, so those caregiver-infant interactions of synchronicity and reciprocity were present in fathers when they were given the chance of being primary caregivers to the child. Okay? We've got extra detail if you want. At a biological level, and this is really interesting, men's physiological response was the same as that of women's. So challenging this idea that women are naturally more able to nurture their children because of their higher levels of estrogen. Fathers that are put in the position of being primary caregivers do actually show the physiological response you would see in mothers. So then your conclusion, your link back, this suggests that sensitive responsiveness is important in developing an attachment, not the gender of the parent, suggesting that fathers can be successful primary attachment figures. Okay, so now if you want, you can pause the video and write up this paragraph from what you remember, just to start consolidating that information and putting it in your own words. All right, so we're going to move on to the second paragraph. This is the argument that as this is still, although it can happen, it's quite rare for the father to be a primary attachment figure. The most likely case is that the father is a secondary attachment figure. We bring in the evidence again. 75% of infants in Schaffer showed that by the age of 18 months were attached to their fathers. So the father was a secondary attachment figure, and that was displayed through separation anxiety when the father walked away, showing that that a significant attachment had been formed. So that's how you add a bit of detail with this information in your AO1. Now moving on to the AO3. A criticism of attachment research on the role of the father is that research fails to explain why fathers do not become the primary attachment figure, even though research shows that they are effective. So you see, you're piggybacking still on what you said in the first paragraph about the fact that we know that that is possible. So why is it so rare? So then you're saying, you're bringing in the kind of argument that it's not a predisposition of the father or the mother, but it's a societal expectation. Traditional gender roles in which women are expected to be more caring and nurturing makes them become the most obvious primary caregiver, and as a result the fathers don't feel, so it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where societal expectations dictate the role of the father rather than any pre-existing ability of the father and the mother to be primary caregivers. Others would argue that from a biological perspective, it's the estrogen, a female hormone, which creates higher levels of nurturing behaviors and increased emotional response to others' needs. So you're basically bringing in a nature-nurture debate, a chicken and egg situation. What came first? Is it society that's making men more prone to be secondary caregivers, Or is it in fact that these societal expectations actually originate from biological realities where there are differences? So fathers might be able to be primary caregivers, but mothers are just more suited to it. It comes more naturally. It's easier. Why rock the boat? Why challenge fathers to have to be primary caregivers when the mothers can do that with such ease because they're biologically predisposed? Yeah. There could be a social reason or a biological basis that determines why fathers don't become the primary attachment figure. Now we've got another evaluation point for this. Research that focuses on the role of father has methodological limitations. So on the back of that, you can argue that research focusing on the role of the father as a secondary attachment figure then draws the conclusion that they're going to behave differently from the mother and have a distinct role, while other researchers will look at the father from a primary attachment figure and then find what they're looking for. So there's a researcher bias and expectations that have distorted the findings. Obviously, if, for example, Shaffer and Emerson were always looking at the mother, and the father was in second place, then obviously they would have detected attachment responses with the mother and not with the father. This is investigator bias that could affect what we know about the role of the father, because the father was just kind of already overlooked as a primary attachment figure in the way the research was carried out. An unintentional observer bias where the observers see the father as being more playful and the mother more nurturing. So there's still an interpretation of the behaviors that can be investigator biased or gender biased. This means we've got no objective means to assess the role of the father. Obviously, the observation is based on an interpretation of the interactions, and therefore that might be why the father ends up turning out to be the secondary attachment figure, because of the way his interactions with the baby are seen as maybe more playful rather than nurturing, and vice versa. So you can write this paragraph now. As you can see, this is a much longer one, so you might want to take a bit more time, but the two evaluation points tie together and they ensure that you'll get full marks at the end. Now, the last point is the father having a different role. He's not primary, not secondary. They've got just a different role that is equally as important. It's just of a different nature. Grossman was the main advocate for this argument, and he suggests that the fathers are less important in emotional development, but play and physical interaction show that fathers are important in stimulation, play, and the ability to interact successfully. So not so much emotionally, but successful kind of interaction with peers, negotiating rules, etc. There is evidence to support this distinctive role of the fathers in attachment. We've got fathers' play interaction are more exciting and pleasurable than with the mother. Mothers are more nurturing and affectionate, which supports the idea of fathers being playmates rather than caregivers. There is here a counter-argument. Children growing up in single-sex or same-sex parent families do not develop any differently from those in two-parent heterosexual families. Now, the point here is saying if the father had a special, important, different role from the mother, if one of these two parents were missing, one of these two kind of abilities would be missing in their children, but there's no evidence to suggest that children with two mothers don't know how to kind of play and negotiate roles with other children, and there's no evidence that children with two fathers don't have any kind of emotional issues. Therefore, again, challenging the view that mothers and fathers are qualitatively different. While research suggests that fathers as secondary attachment figure have a role through play and physical interactions, not all the research agrees with it, so we don't have consistency of findings, and therefore the research is ultimately inconclusive. So you can wrap that up with that point. Last point, if you want, this is extra, yeah. Research on parenting and the role of the father has economic implications. As I mentioned before, you can wrap it up with these economic implications. As we said, mothers might feel pressures to stay at home, therefore they might be not economically active as much as men, take more time off from work for for the care of the children. Here we've got research showing that 9% of single British parents were male, 5.3 million British mothers were in employment, while male comprising 10% of those who care for children while their partner goes out to work. So you could be arguing that this is slowly shifting. The new research has kind of shown new avenues that can be pursued by parents. Even the government has addressed this through parental leave rather than maternity leave only, where the parents can split the care of children. So the fathers are playing a bigger role in parenting than before, with many of them becoming the primary attachment figure. And that's a nice conclusion, showing that because the researcher is no longer consistently suggesting that only the mother can cover this role, the implications of this are in the real world economic as well as practical. And that's your last paragraph. I hope this was helpful. Goodbye.